So I've been living in Italy for 5 years, and the question that I still get asked the most is, why did you move here? For a lot of people, I guess that's a good conversation starter. I personally get sick of answering that question, probably because my answer is not so simple. A lot of people I meet had a partner who lived here, or one of the top reasons people come here is to retire. But it's hard for me to give a short answer because there isn't one specific reason. It happened at a tumultuous time in my life and the world, so it's kind of still hard for me to talk about. But because I get asked that question a lot now, if anyone asks me, I can just direct them to this video so I don't have to tell the whole story again. I don't know why I'm so nervous about this. In a previous video, I talked about how I got my Italian citizenship. If you'd like to check it out, I'll link it here. At the end of that video, I said I got my Italian passport and then I just put it in a drawer and kind of forgot about it for more than 10 years. Because I have dual citizenship, I didn't have to go through as much advanced planning, and timing wise, I could move a lot faster than a lot of people. Another thing that I had to my advantage was friends and family back home that I knew if it didn't work out for whatever reason, I wouldn't be stranded in another country with nowhere to go. Just want to get those things out of the way because this is not to be taken as advice or suggestions on how to move abroad. I'm not telling you that this was a great plan. Just because it worked out doesn't mean it was the best way to go about it. Back in 2011, after I got my Italian citizenship, I was going through a lot in my life. I ended up moving for a job opportunity from San Diego, where I lived, to LA. It was a good opportunity, but I have to say I wasn't super excited about it because I don't really love working in the corporate world, and it was a stressful job. But I didn't have to worry about it too long because after moving there, I lost that job after about 6 months. It was tough because I didn't know very many people in LA. I had my sisters there, but I didn't have this vast network of people I could make connections with, and the job market wasn't amazing. It was just really hard for me to try to get another corporate job, which also I didn't really want. As a part-time job, I had always worked in hotel banquets as a server. It's a very flexible job. So since I got laid off at my job when I moved to LA, I swore to myself I would never be in that position again where I had to depend on one source of income because it was really stressful to lose that. And so I just kind of threw myself into doing banquets for full time, which is harder than it sounds. People like to badmouth the tipped industry in the US, but the service industry can be very lucrative if you work in the right type of environments, and high-end hotel banquets is probably one of the best paying service industry jobs you can get. I enjoyed it. I was making good money. At one point, I was working for 3 different hotels. That meant on some days I'd work at a business conference in the morning, and then get in my car and drive all the way across town in traffic to set up and work an entire wedding until 2 or 3 in the morning. With all the travel perks, I got to travel and take off when I wanted, and I've always been a creative person, so I was doing other things like writing, but I never got a paid vacation. Basically, in my job, when you missed work, you didn't get paid. I knew I couldn't do it forever because it was really a physical job. Living in a place like LA, if you're not in like an upwardly mobile career where you're getting raises every year, it can be really hard to live there just as a regular person with a regular job. I knew people who had full-time jobs during the week and they'd work at the hotel on weekends. I'm sure New York is similar. Everyone's hustling. You're working multiple jobs. You're trying to move forward with your creative career. It's exciting, but it's also it's exhausting. At the same time, I was also dealing with a long history of undiagnosed illness. It turned out I finally did get diagnosed with this rare autoimmune thing, and I was doing well. I was feeling healthier. I was working hard. I wasn't really thinking about Italy at all, but I did have a friend who moved to Australia suddenly, and I thought that was so cool. And when I talked to him about it, I thought I could never do that. Like, I don't think I could ever move to another country. I've always wanted to live in Europe, but it didn't seem possible. It didn't seem within my grasp, within my reach. Then 2 things happened that made me really think that maybe I could do this. And the first one was in 2019. Like spring of 2019, my parents called and said that they were finally planning their dream trip to Italy. So how I got my Italian citizenship was through my grandma. So my mom also has Italian heritage, obviously. She had always wanted to go one day to Italy. So my parents finally planned a trip and they were really excited about it. And they asked me if I wanted to join them. I had been to Italy before and they had never even left the country. I think I helped motivate them to go because of how much I talked up Italy. So for the first week I was with them. We went to Rome and Florence and had the best time. I just remember feeling as soon as I came back to Italy, even though I hadn't been here in 20 years at that point, all these feelings kept flooding back. And I just remembered how much I loved it here and how comfortable I felt and how I just had lost that part of me that was driven to want to move back here. I wanted to see some cities that I'd never been to before. So I spent a couple days in Parma and then I chose Turin. I heard they were famous for chocolate and coffee and I like both of those things. I didn't know much about the city other than that and I was here for 3 days. I was very comfortable here. I felt really at home. I just walked around and I didn't do a lot of tourist things. I went to the Museum of Cinema, which I still recommend to everyone who comes here. Something about the city really felt like home to me. And I don't know if I believe in manifestation or woo-woo things like that sometimes, but the whole time I was in Italy, I was imagining moving and trying to, maybe in the back of my mind, was trying to figure out how I would make it happen, but I wasn't consciously planning anything. We came back and I went back to my regular life. A few months later, I got my cat, which was in February of 2020. I remember I was working a lot because we were just really busy with events and all of a sudden, I don't know if anyone has like a specific memory of when they realized that the pandemic was really serious, but I have a specific memory because I worked in the events industry. We were very aware of what was happening and I went from on Monday, I had a full schedule coming up for the week and then by Friday, all of my events had been canceled. The hotels were being shut down indefinitely. It was very clear that it was very serious. Our last event, I remember before we shut down, it was supposed to be a wedding, but they canceled the wedding and they just had like a very small reception. But the mood of the party felt more like a funeral than a wedding, especially behind the scenes. I felt my perspective shift that night as every small moment of joy and fun that I used to love about this job now seemed suddenly dangerous. The stable life I'd taken years to build was slipping away so quickly. People don't talk about this time frame of 2020. I don't know if it's like because we had this collective shift in the world. For a lot of people, they had to go from working in person to working from home, which is a whole stressful thing. Kids had to do school at home. The whole world was in an upheaval. And when you work in events, your schedule isn't always the same. You work as much as possible when you're busy. And then when you're slow, you might have a few weeks off and you don't have any money coming in. I was used to that sort of fluctuation, but because I had 3 different hotels I worked for, I was always busy. All of a sudden, for it to all be gone, all of the hotels in the entire country, I think maybe most of the world, had no hotels for a long time. Also, I had my own illness. I didn't know what would happen to me if I got COVID, so I was very careful and cautious. Not only did I lose those jobs at the time, but I knew in my heart that I just would not want to go back and do that again for many, many years at least. And it just kind of ruined the fun of it for me. So I knew I had to do something else. Online teaching was in high demand, and especially teaching English to Chinese students remotely through these schools that were based in China. That really interested me because it's something I could do from home. I had experience. I was very confident that I could get a job teaching English, and I thought it would be a fun thing to do, at least for a while. But the problem was the time difference from California to China. I don't know how many hours it is, but I knew that the times that I would need to work would be like 2 or 3 in the morning in California. And that just wasn't something that I thought I could do. Since I'd be working remotely, I figured I could work anywhere. And when I was looking online at how to get hired at these Chinese schools, because they had specific criteria for hiring, there was a lot of teachers on YouTube explaining how it was done. I started watching some of these videos and I was surprised to see how many of them were actually teaching and living in other countries. So that's when the wheels started turning. And I remembered I had this Italian passport passport that had been burning a hole in this drawer for years now. Meanwhile, there was a lot of stuff also going on in the world aside from the pandemic that was kind of chaotic. There were protests all over the country. LA was announcing curfews by text every day. I don't like to get too political on here, but I didn't have much hope for the future of my country. So I just kind of wanted to get out of there. I saw people were living in other countries and teaching English and started doing research on what my expenses would be if I moved to Italy. And it turned out that was a really good way for me to drastically lower my expenses and also live somewhere where I always dreamed of living. I wasn't driving anymore. I didn't need a car. If I moved, I knew I wouldn't need to be paying $400 a month for health insurance anymore. And I just looked at the cost of apartments in Turin, and it looked like I could get something decent for maybe half or less than the rent I was paying in LA. So I decided to just go for it. I think because I was in my 40s, I had a lot of life experience and I had a lot of different types of work experience I can draw from. So to me, it didn't seem like that much of a risk. I never moved to another country before, but I had a lot of experience moving to random cities by myself and just kind of starting over. That's always been something that I like to do, and I kind of thrive in unknown environments. The pressure of it kind of makes me figure out a way for it to work. I took my TEFL course before I left. I sold everything I owned in order to pay for the expenses of moving. I had to get my cat's health records and all of her travel documents. I'll make another video about the process of what I did in order to move, because the timeline, it was pretty quick. When I told people that I was moving, no one was really surprised. It was always known among my friends and family that I had this dream, and they were very supportive. People say, if you knew you only had 6 months to live, what would you do? And that's kind of the state of how I felt the world was at the time. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know how long the pandemic would last. I just felt like that was my chance to follow my dream, and I think it worked out the way that it was supposed to. So that's the really long story of why I moved to Italy. Feel free to subscribe if you would like to know more about my life in Italy or Turin in general. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. And remember, you only get one life, so start living it.